Welcome to Little Story Corner, where real-life stories are told. Please sit back and enjoy listening. I still remember the exact moment she walked into that boardroom and dropped her leather portfolio onto the polished oak table. The color drained from her face. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Just 3 months earlier, she had thrown a $5 bill at my feet in a grocery store parking lot and laughed while strangers recorded the humiliation on their phones. Now she was staring at me from across a conference table worth more than most people's homes. Around me sat attorneys, bankers, and city officials. Around her sat panic, because the woman she had treated like a worthless old scavenger owned the one piece of land standing between her company and financial disaster. And for the first time in her life, Victoria Langford had no power. But before I tell you how she ended up there, I need to take you back to the day everything began. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 71 years old, a widow, and according to half the people in my town, I was the old woman who collected cans from trash bins. To be fair, that's exactly what I did. Every morning after my coffee and toast, I'd put on an old denim jacket, grab my folding cart, and walk through town collecting aluminum cans and plastic bottles. Some people thought it was sad. Others thought it was strange. I never bothered correcting them. The truth was simple. I liked being outside. I liked staying active. And after losing my husband Harold 8 years earlier, those walks gave structure to my days. What people assumed about me wasn't my responsibility. The incident happened on a warm Thursday afternoon in late spring. The parking lot outside Franklin's Market was packed. Families loaded groceries into trunks. Shopping carts rattled across the pavement. A teenager was selling cookies for a school fundraiser near the entrance. I was emptying a recycling bin near the edge of the lot when I heard a luxury SUV pull into a reserved parking space. The vehicle looked brand new. The woman who stepped out looked equally expensive. Designer sunglasses, tailored business suit, high heels that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. I recognized her immediately. Everyone in town did. Victoria Langford, the local real estate developer who seemed to be everywhere these days. Billboards, newspaper articles, television interviews. She was considered one of the city's biggest success stories. At first, I paid her no attention. I found another soda can and dropped it into my cart. Then I heard her voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, take a look at this." The words were loud enough to turn heads. I looked up. Victoria was staring directly at me. Several shoppers slowed down. A few stopped completely. She laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not an embarrassed laugh. The kind of laugh someone makes when they believe they're untouchable. This, she said, gesturing toward me, is exactly why people should make better decisions in life. The crowd grew larger. I felt dozens of eyes settle on me. A younger version of myself might have said something. At 71, I'd learned that dignity sometimes means refusing to perform for an audience. So I kept sorting through the recyclables. Victoria continued. You spend your whole life making excuses, and eventually you end up digging through garbage. A few people chuckled. Most looked uncomfortable. One young woman near the entrance frowned as if she wanted to intervene. But nobody said anything. That's often how public humiliation works. Everyone knows it's wrong. Nobody wants to be the first person to step forward. Victoria reached into her purse. She pulled out a $5 bill. For a second, I thought she might hand it to me politely. Instead, she tossed it onto the pavement near my shoes. The bill fluttered in the breeze before landing beside my cart. "There," she said. "Maybe that'll help." A couple of people laughed again. Someone nearby started recording with a phone. I looked down at the bill, then back at her. For just a moment, our eyes met. What struck me wasn't her arrogance. It was how desperately she needed the crowd's approval. She wanted them to see her as successful, powerful, superior. And somehow humiliating an old woman made her feel larger. Without saying a word, I bent down and picked up the $5. The crowd seemed disappointed. People love conflict. They wanted a fight, an argument, a dramatic scene. I gave them none. I folded the bill neatly and placed it inside my jacket pocket. Then I pushed my cart away. Behind me, I could hear Victoria laughing again. I continued across the parking lot until the noise faded. By the time I reached my old pickup truck, my phone was ringing. I glanced at the screen. It was my attorney, Michael Reeves. I answered. "Hello, Michael." His voice sounded unusually excited. "Evelyn, they've increased the offer." I opened the truck door. How much? There was a brief pause. Then he gave me the number. I looked back toward the parking lot where Victoria still stood surrounded by people. $40 million. That was the new offer, and they were becoming desperate. I smiled to myself, not because of the money. Money had stopped impressing me years ago. What interested me was the name attached to the proposal. The company making that offer was Langford Development, Victoria Langford's company. At that moment, she had no idea that the old woman she'd humiliated in public owned the one property she needed more than anything in the world. And she definitely had no idea that before this story was over, that little $5 bill would become the most expensive mistake of her life. Part 2. The woman nobody knew. After my call with Michael, I sat in my pickup truck for several minutes without starting the engine. Not because I was upset, not because of Victoria. At my age, very little surprised me anymore. What stayed with me was the look in her eyes, not cruelty. I've met truly cruel people in my life. Victoria was something different. She was arrogant, impatient, convinced that success made her better than everyone around her. And that kind of thinking can be far more dangerous than simple cruelty. As I drove home, I found myself thinking about Harold. My husband had been gone for 8 years, but some days it still felt like yesterday, especially on afternoons like this. He would have laughed about the whole thing. Not at me, at the situation. Harold always said that people reveal their character when they believe there are no consequences. That evening, I pulled into the long gravel driveway leading to my property. Most people in town had never seen my home. From the road, all they could see were trees and an old wooden fence. They assumed I lived in a small house somewhere near downtown. The truth was different. The property stretched across several hundred acres. There was a modest farmhouse near the center. Nothing extravagant. No gates. No fountains. No luxury cars. Just a peaceful home surrounded by land. Exactly the way Harold and I wanted it. As I walked inside, my gaze settled on a framed photograph sitting on the mantel. Harold stood beside me in the picture. We looked much younger, much stronger, much more certain that life would last forever. Like many couples our age, we started with almost nothing. When we married, Harold worked construction. I worked part-time at a hardware store. Money was always tight. There were months when we counted every dollar. Months when a broken appliance felt like a financial emergency. But we worked, and worked, and worked some more. Eventually, Harold started his own construction company. At first, it was just him and 2 employees, then 5, then 10, then 50. Over the years, the company grew beyond anything we had imagined. What made Harold successful wasn't intelligence. Although he was smart, it wasn't ambition either. It was respect. He treated janitors the same way he treated executives. He remembered birthdays, asked about people's children, listened more than he spoke. People trusted him, and trust built everything we had. After Harold passed away, I sold the company. I was 63 years old. I didn't want the stress anymore. Instead, I invested carefully, conservatively, the way people from our generation often do. No gambling, no chasing trends, no flashy risks, just patience. Year after year, the investments grew, the land increased in value, and eventually my financial advisors informed me that I had become wealthier than I ever imagined possible. None of it changed my life. I still bought my clothes at department stores, still drove practical vehicles, still clipped coupons occasionally, and yes, I still collected cans. The next morning, I followed my usual routine: coffee, toast, morning walk, recycling cart. Several people recognized me from the viral video. A teenage boy whispered something to his friend. 2 women stared. One man looked embarrassed and offered me a polite smile. I returned it. By noon, the video had spread even further. My phone started ringing. Former coworkers, old friends, even distant relatives. Everyone wanted to know if I was okay. I assured them I was. The attention bothered them far more than it bothered me. Later that afternoon, Michael called again. "Have you seen the latest numbers?" he asked. "I assume they've gone higher." "They have." I sat on my porch swing. "How desperate are they?" "Very." That answer interested me. For months, Langford Development had been trying to purchase a particular section of my land. The property sat on the edge of the city. Years ago, most people considered it worthless. Now the area had become one of the fastest-growing parts of the county. Developers wanted it badly, especially Victoria. What she didn't know was that I had no intention of selling simply because someone offered enough money. Some things mattered more than price. Any idea why they're pushing so hard? I asked. Michael chuckled. Because without your property, their entire development plan falls apart. I looked across the field stretching toward the horizon. A gentle breeze moved through the tall grass. Harold used to stand out there and talk about the future. The future had arrived, and apparently everyone wanted a piece of it. That evening, I did something unusual. I watched one of Victoria's television interviews. She sat confidently beneath studio lights discussing leadership and success. The host praised her accomplishments. Victoria smiled. Then she said something that caught my attention. "You create your own future. Nobody owes you anything." The audience applauded. I thought about the workers who had helped build her projects, the secretaries, electricians, truck drivers, accountants, the people whose names never appeared on billboards. Success is rarely a solo achievement. People who forget that eventually learn difficult lessons. I turned off the television. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. My phone buzzed one final time. It was a message from Michael. The city had scheduled a formal negotiation meeting. The owner of the property would finally be present. For months, Victoria had been negotiating through lawyers and representatives. Soon she would learn exactly who owned the land she needed. And when that moment arrived, I suspected the memory of a $5 bill would suddenly become very important. Part 3. The $40 million deal. Over the next several weeks, life in town seemed to revolve around one thing: Victoria Langford's new development project. You couldn't escape it. The local newspaper ran articles about it. The evening news covered it. City council meetings were packed with residents eager to hear updates. According to the reports, the project would bring jobs, new businesses, and millions of dollars into the local economy. Many people supported it. Others had concerns. I found myself somewhere in the middle. I wasn't opposed to growth. Our town had changed many times over the decades. Change was inevitable. But I believed growth should benefit everyone, not just the people at the top. One afternoon, Michael stopped by my house. We sat on the back porch overlooking the property that had suddenly become the most valuable piece of real estate in the county. He opened a folder filled with documents. "Things are getting tense," he said. "How tense?" "They've already spent millions preparing the project." I nodded. That wasn't surprising. Developers often invested heavily before every piece of land was secured. Confidence can be an expensive habit. Michael adjusted his glasses. If this deal fails, Langford Development could be facing serious trouble. I looked out toward the fields. The grass moved gently in the wind. For a moment, I imagined Harold sitting beside me. He always believed that decisions made under pressure revealed a person's true character. "Have they increased the offer again?" I asked. Michael smiled. "Twice." That made me laugh softly. Money. For some people, money was the answer to every problem. Offer more. Push harder. Apply pressure. Eventually, someone would say yes. What Victoria still didn't understand was that I wasn't motivated by price. The land represented decades of memories. Harold had walked those fields, planted trees there, made plans there. Selling it was never going to be a simple business transaction. A few days later, I was downtown collecting cans when I overheard two men discussing Victoria. One of them worked at a local bank. The other owned a hardware store. Neither noticed I was listening. "They're stretched thin," the banker said quietly. "How thin?" "Thinner than people realize." The hardware store owner whistled. "That bad?" The banker nodded. "If they don't secure that last property, investors are going to panic." I continued walking. Interesting. Very interesting. Victoria's public image remained flawless, confident, successful, always smiling. But behind the scenes, cracks were beginning to appear. That evening, I decided to do something I rarely did. I attended a city council meeting. I sat in the back row wearing my usual denim jacket. Nobody paid much attention to me, which was exactly how I liked it. Victoria stood at the front of the room presenting her vision. She was polished, professional, charismatic. I could easily understand why investors trusted her. She spoke about opportunity, economic growth, a brighter future. The audience applauded several times. Then someone asked a question about the missing property. For the first time, I noticed a slight change in her expression. Only a fraction of a second, but it was there. Tension. "The negotiations are ongoing," she replied. "We remain optimistic." The answer sounded confident, yet her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. By the end of the meeting, I was convinced of something. Victoria needed my land far more than I needed her money. A week later, Michael called again. "The final negotiation has been scheduled." I had been expecting that when, next Thursday, I remained silent. After months of discussions through lawyers and representatives, the time had finally arrived. Victoria had insisted on meeting the owner directly. She believed face-to-face negotiations would help close the deal. Poor woman. She had no idea what awaited her. The morning of the meeting arrived warm and clear. I woke early, made coffee, fed the birds, read part of the newspaper. Then I dressed carefully. Nothing extravagant, just a navy blue blazer and a simple white blouse. The same kind of clothing I had worn countless times over the years. As I looked in the mirror, I thought about the grocery store parking lot, the crowd, the laughter, the $5 bill. Oddly enough, I felt no anger. Life had taught me that revenge rarely brings peace. But accountability, that was different. Sometimes people need to face the consequences of their choices, not to destroy them, to teach them. The meeting was held in a downtown office building. When I arrived, several attorneys were already there. A representative from the bank, 2 city officials, and a handful of investors. Everyone greeted me warmly. We exchanged handshakes and small talk. Then I took my seat at the head of the conference table. The room grew quiet. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. 10 o'clock arrived. The door opened. Victoria entered carrying a leather portfolio. She looked confident, focused, prepared. She began speaking before fully entering the room. "Good morning, everyone. Let's see if we can finally get this." Then she looked up and saw me. The words died in her throat. Her face turned pale. The portfolio slipped slightly in her hands. For several long seconds, she simply stared. I watched recognition spread across her features. First confusion, then disbelief, then horror. The room remained silent. Nobody understood what was happening except the 2 of us. Victoria looked around the table, at the attorneys, at the bankers, at the city officials, then back at me. Finally, one of the investors broke the silence. "Ms. Langford, I'd like to formally introduce the owner of the property." He gestured toward me. My eyes met hers. And for the first time since the grocery store parking lot, I spoke directly to her. "Hello, Victoria." The expression on her face was worth far more than $40 million. Part 4. When Power Changes Hands. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Victoria stood frozen near the conference room door. The confident woman who had dominated television interviews and city council meetings suddenly looked lost. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. One of the attorneys pulled out a chair. "Miss Langford." She blinked several times. "Oh, yes, right, of course." Her voice sounded different now. Smaller, less certain. She slowly walked to her seat. I noticed her hands trembling slightly as she placed her portfolio on the table. Nobody else seemed to understand the significance of the moment. To them, this was simply a business meeting. To Victoria and me, it was something much more personal. The lead attorney began reviewing documents, property surveys, environmental reports, financial projections. Everyone focused on numbers. Everyone except Victoria. Several times I caught her staring at me, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The old woman she had publicly humiliated, the woman she assumed was poor, the woman she thought was digging through garbage to survive, now sitting at the head of the table as the most important person in the room. Finally, after nearly 20 minutes, Victoria cleared her throat. I wasn't aware." She stopped. Nobody responded. She tried again. "I wasn't aware that you owned the property." I folded my hands calmly. Clearly, a few people exchanged confused glances. The tension in the room became impossible to ignore. Victoria looked down at the papers in front of her, then back at me. "I think there may have been a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. Interesting choice of words. I remembered the $5 bill landing near my shoes, the laughter, the crowd, the phones recording. No misunderstanding had occurred that day. She knew exactly what she was doing. But I wasn't interested in humiliating her. Not here. Not now. The investors needed answers. The city needed answers. This meeting wasn't about revenge. It was about responsibility. The negotiations continued. For the next hour, lawyers discussed zoning issues and construction schedules. Bank representatives reviewed financing arrangements. The numbers were staggering. $40 million, then $42 million, then $44 million. The offers kept increasing. Yet I remained unmoved. Eventually, one of the investors leaned forward. "Mrs. Carter, perhaps you could help us understand your concerns." That was a fair question. I looked around the room. Every face was waiting. Every face except Victoria's. She already knew this wasn't just about money. "My concern," I said carefully, "isn't the price." The room grew quiet. "My concern is what happens after the project is built." A city official nodded. I continued. "I've lived in this community for over 50 years. I've seen businesses come and go. I've seen promises made and forgotten." The investors listened attentively. "What matters to me is whether the people who already live here benefit from this project." One banker spoke up. "You're concerned about local jobs." Among other things, the discussion shifted. For the first time, the meeting became less about profit and more about people. Something I suspected hadn't happened often in Victoria's world. After another hour, the meeting ended without a final agreement. Additional discussions would be necessary. As everyone gathered their papers, Victoria remained seated, clearly waiting. The others gradually left the room. Within minutes, only the two of us remained. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she stood. "I owe you an apology." There it was. The sentence she'd probably been rehearsing since walking through that door. I looked at her quietly. She continued. "What happened at the grocery store?" Her voice faltered. "It was wrong." I noticed she couldn't quite meet my eyes. Perhaps for the first time in years, embarrassment was winning a battle against pride. "You embarrassed me in front of a lot of people," I said. She nodded. "I know." "You recorded it." Another nod. "I know." "You enjoyed it." That one took longer, but eventually she whispered, "Yes." At least she was honest. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Outside the conference room windows, traffic moved through downtown streets. People walked along sidewalks. Life continued. Victoria finally looked directly at me. "I can't change what I did." "No, but I'm sorry." I studied her face. She seemed sincere. The problem was that sincerity is difficult to measure, especially when $44 million is sitting on the table. "Are you sorry because of what happened?" I asked. "Or because you need something from me?" The question hit harder than any accusation. Her expression collapsed, because she didn't have an answer, or at least not one she believed herself. I stood and gathered my papers. The meeting was over. As I reached the door, Victoria spoke again. "Can I ask you something?" I turned. "Why do you collect cans?" I almost smiled. Of all the questions she could have asked, that was the one she chose. "Because I enjoy it." Her eyes widened. "That's it." "That's it." She looked genuinely stunned, as if she couldn't comprehend doing something without financial motivation. For years, success had been measured in dollars, profit margins, market value, growth projections. The idea that someone might simply enjoy a quiet walk and a useful purpose seemed foreign to her. I opened the door, then paused. "You know, Victoria," she waited. "The saddest part isn't that you thought I was poor." I saw confusion in her eyes. "The saddest part is that you believed being poor would make someone less worthy of respect." The words landed with devastating force. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her. I simply told the truth. And sometimes truth cuts deeper than anger ever could. As I walked away, I didn't look back. But I had a feeling that for the first time in her life, Victoria Langford was beginning to see herself clearly. And what she saw wasn't someone she liked. Part 5. The Price of Pride. For the next few weeks, I heard Victoria Langford's name everywhere. Only now people weren't praising her. They were questioning her. The change happened gradually at first, then all at once. One morning, I was having breakfast when my phone rang. It was Michael. "You should see what's happening online." I poured myself another cup of coffee. I try not to spend much time online. "You may want to make an exception today." That caught my attention. After we hung up, I turned on my laptop. Within minutes, I understood what he meant. The old grocery store video had resurfaced. Again. But this time the public reaction was very different. At first, people had laughed. Some had even praised Victoria for her harsh comments about personal responsibility. Now they knew who I was. Now they knew the story behind the woman with the recycling cart, and suddenly the video looked much uglier. Thousands of comments criticized Victoria's behavior. News outlets picked up the story. Local reporters began asking questions. National blogs shared the footage. The public embarrassment she once enjoyed was now aimed directly at her. I didn't celebrate. I've lived long enough to know that public humiliation rarely teaches wisdom. It mostly teaches fear. Still, consequences have a way of arriving eventually. By the following week, the situation grew worse. Former employees began speaking publicly, not about the grocery store incident, about Victoria herself. One woman described being humiliated during staff meetings. Another spoke about impossible expectations and constant criticism. A former project manager claimed talented employees regularly left because they felt undervalued. Were all the accusations true? I didn't know. But the pattern sounded familiar. Respect had never seemed important to Victoria. Results mattered. People didn't. And eventually, people remember. One afternoon, I met Michael for lunch. The restaurant overlooked the town square. As we sat near the window, he opened another folder. I've never seen anything unravel this quickly. I glanced at the documents. Several investors were reconsidering their involvement. A few had already pulled out. Bank financing was becoming uncertain. "What happens if the project fails?" I asked. Michael sighed. "Hundreds of people could lose their jobs." That answer bothered me. Not because of Victoria, because of everyone else. Secretaries, accountants, construction crews, maintenance workers. People who had done nothing wrong. People who would suffer consequences they didn't deserve. As we left the restaurant, I found myself thinking about responsibility. The older I get, the more complicated right and wrong seem. When we're young, justice feels simple. Someone hurts you. They deserve consequences. End of story. But life rarely works that way. Every decision affects innocent people too. That evening, there was a knock at my front door. I wasn't expecting visitors. When I opened it, I found Victoria standing on my porch. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She looked different. Very different. The expensive confidence was gone. The perfect appearance was gone. Even her posture seemed different. Tired. Defeated. Human. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said quietly. I stepped aside. "Come in." We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Harold and I had shared thousands of meals over the years. Victoria looked around the room. Her eyes lingered on old family photographs, the simple furniture, the worn hardwood floors. Nothing about the house suggested great wealth, and perhaps that confused her. After a few moments, she finally spoke. "I owe you another apology." I waited. This wasn't something she could rush through. I've spent most of my life believing success made me important. Her voice trembled slightly. "I thought money meant I'd earned the right to judge other people." The honesty surprised me, not because she was wrong, because she was finally admitting it. She stared down at her hands. "When I saw you in that parking lot, I never saw a person." The room grew quiet. I saw someone I thought was beneath me. I could hear genuine shame in her voice, the kind that comes from self-awareness rather than public pressure. At least I hope so. A tear slipped down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away. I keep replaying that moment. The $5 bill, the laughter, the crowd. I don't recognize the person I was. For the first time, I saw no defensiveness, no excuses, no attempt to justify herself, just regret. Real regret. The question was whether regret alone was enough. After several minutes, she looked up. "Are you going to sell the land?" There it was, the question hiding behind every apology, every conversation, every visit. I appreciated her honesty. At least she wasn't pretending anymore. "I haven't decided." Her shoulders sank slightly. I continued. "If this were only about you, the answer would be easier." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, there are hundreds of families connected to that project." The realization crossed her face immediately. For perhaps the first time, she wasn't thinking only about herself. She was thinking about everyone else, the employees, the workers, the people depending on those jobs. We talked for nearly an hour about business, about mistakes, about aging, about how quickly success can disappear. When she finally stood to leave, the sun was setting outside. At the door, she turned back toward me. "I don't expect forgiveness." I nodded. "That's probably wise." A faint smile appeared, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her. Then she left. As her car disappeared down the driveway, I stood quietly on the porch. I wasn't sure whether Victoria had changed. Not yet. People can say the right things when they're desperate. The real test comes later, when nobody is watching, when there's nothing left to gain. And somehow I had a feeling that test was only beginning. Part 6, a second chance. The weeks after Victoria's visit were surprisingly quiet. No dramatic headlines. No angry confrontations. No desperate phone calls from investors. Just silence. And sometimes silence tells you more than noise ever can. I continued living my life the same way I always had. Every morning I walked through town with my recycling cart. Every afternoon I spent time on the property Harold and I had loved for decades. Life felt familiar again. Yet beneath the surface, things were changing. One Saturday morning, I was volunteering at a community food drive when I spotted a familiar face. Victoria. At first, I thought I was mistaken. The woman unloading boxes from a pickup truck looked nothing like the polished executive who had once dominated local television. She wore jeans, work gloves, a plain sweatshirt. No cameras followed her. No reporters interviewed her. She was simply helping. I watched from a distance for nearly 3 hours. Not once did she try to attract attention. Not once did she mention her company. Not once did she complain. Interesting. Very interesting. A week later, I heard another story. A former employee told me Victoria had personally contacted several workers she had treated poorly in the past. Not through lawyers. Not through public relations representatives. Personally, some accepted her apologies. Others didn't. She continued anyway. Then came the town hall meeting. The room was packed. Residents wanted answers about the project. Investors wanted reassurance. Employees wanted hope. Victoria stepped to the microphone. The atmosphere felt tense. Everyone expected another carefully crafted business speech. Instead, she surprised them. And me. She took responsibility. Not partial responsibility. Not the kind of apology that blames circumstances. Complete responsibility. I became the kind of person I never intended to become. The room fell silent. She spoke about arrogance, about ego, about measuring people by income and appearance. She even referenced the grocery store incident, not by minimizing it, by admitting how shameful it had been. Many people remained skeptical. I couldn't blame them. Trust isn't rebuilt in a day. Sometimes it takes years. Still, something had changed. The Victoria standing behind that microphone wasn't the same woman who had thrown a $5 bill onto the pavement. Whether the change would last remained uncertain, but it was real. A few days later, Michael arrived at my house carrying another stack of documents. He looked exhausted. "You've become the most popular woman in the county." I laughed. "I've always wanted that title." He smiled and sat down. "So, have you made your decision?" The question had been coming for weeks, maybe months. I poured 2 cups of coffee and joined him at the kitchen table. The answer wasn't simple. Every option carried consequences. If I refused the sale, Victoria would suffer, but so would hundreds of employees. If I approved the sale without conditions, valuable leverage would disappear. And perhaps an important lesson along with it, I thought about Harold, about the company we built, about the values that guided us. Respect, responsibility, community. The answer finally became clear. I'll sell. Michael nodded slowly. I suspected you might. But there will be conditions. That got his attention. I handed him a list I'd been working on for days. He read quietly, then looked up. A smile appeared. These are good. The first condition protected existing employees. No mass layoffs. No sacrificing workers to increase profits. The second established a scholarship fund for local students from working-class families. The third funded a citywide recycling and environmental initiative. The fourth required public accountability reports for community commitments connected to the project. In other words, if the development moved forward, everyone would benefit. Not just investors, not just executives, everyone. Michael reviewed the list once more. You know she's going to accept. Probably. And if she doesn't, I smiled. Then there won't be a deal. The final meeting was scheduled for the following week. When I entered the conference room, Victoria was already there. This time she stood when I walked in. Not because of my wealth, not because of the land, out of respect. The difference mattered. The attorneys reviewed the conditions, one by one. Silence filled the room as everyone absorbed the details. Finally, the lead attorney turned toward Victoria, Ms. Langford. She didn't hesitate, not even for a second. I accept. A few investors exchanged nervous looks. One of them objected to the scholarship fund. Another questioned the community requirements. Victoria stopped them. No. Her voice was calm, firm. We're doing this. For a moment, I saw something I'd never seen before. Leadership. Real leadership. Not control. Not authority. Responsibility. The meeting continued for another hour. By the end, the agreement was complete. The project would move forward. Jobs would be protected. Students would receive opportunities. The community would benefit. Everyone won. Or at least everyone had a chance to. As people began leaving the room, Victoria approached me. She looked nervous, almost like a student waiting for a teacher's response. Thank you, she said quietly. I shook my head. Don't thank me yet. She smiled slightly. Fair enough. The real challenge wasn't signing papers. The real challenge was becoming the person she claimed she wanted to be. And that journey was only beginning. Part 7, The Real Fortune. 6 months later, I found myself standing in the same grocery store parking lot where this entire story had begun. The weather was cooler now. Autumn had settled into our town, painting the trees with shades of gold, orange, and red. A gentle breeze carried fallen leaves across the pavement. The place looked exactly the same, and yet everything had changed. I stood beside a recycling bin, dropping a few aluminum cans into my cart. Old habits die hard. Besides, I still enjoyed it. A lot of people never understood that. They assumed wealth changes what brings you happiness. In my experience, it rarely does. A few moments later, another car pulled into the parking lot. I recognized it immediately. Victoria stepped out. No luxury SUV this time. No assistance. No expensive business suit. Just jeans, a sweater, and comfortable walking shoes. She smiled when she saw me. Morning, Evelyn. Morning. For a few seconds, we simply stood there. Two women from completely different worlds. Or at least we had once believed we were. Then Victoria noticed an empty soda can near a shopping cart return. Without saying a word, she walked over, picked it up, and dropped it into my recycling bag. I couldn't help smiling. Look at you. She laughed. I know. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have believed this either. Neither would I. We began walking slowly across the parking lot together. No cameras followed us. No reporters waited nearby. No audience watched, which made the moment more meaningful. Because character is revealed when nobody is looking, not when everyone is. As we walked, Victoria told me about the scholarship fund. The first group of students had already been selected. Several came from families who had never imagined college would be financially possible. One young woman planned to study nursing. Another wanted to become a teacher. A young man hoped to study engineering. Listening to those stories warmed my heart. Those opportunities would outlast any building, any development, any business deal. Next, she updated me on the recycling initiative. Participation across the city had exceeded expectations. Schools were involved. Community groups were involved. Even local businesses had joined. The program was becoming one of the town's biggest success stories. Harold would have loved that. Victoria seemed to sense my thoughts. You know, she said softly, I used to think success meant being admired. I looked at her, and now... She paused. Now I think success means leaving something better than you found it. I nodded. That was a lesson many people spend an entire lifetime trying to learn. Some never do. We eventually reached a bench near the edge of the parking lot. The same area where she had once thrown that $5 bill at my feet. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I reached into my jacket pocket. Victoria looked confused. I pulled out a small plastic sleeve. Inside was a slightly worn $5 bill. Her eyes widened immediately. You kept it? Of course. She stared at it. The memory clearly hit her all at once. the embarrassment, the arrogance, the mistake, everything. I don't think I'll ever forgive myself for that day. I studied her expression carefully. Then I shook my head. That's not the goal. She frowned. It isn't. No. I handed her the plastic sleeve. The goal isn't to carry shame forever. She looked down at the bill. The goal is to remember the lesson. A tear appeared in the corner of her eye. This time she didn't try to hide it. For several moments she simply stared at the bill. Then she smiled. A small smile, a genuine one, the kind that comes from growth rather than victory. A few weeks later, we attended a community event together. The scholarship fund was being officially recognized. Several students gave speeches. Parents cried. Teachers smiled. The room felt full of hope. Near the end of the ceremony, I walked to the display case holding memorabilia connected to the program. Inside sat photographs, letters, awards, and one carefully framed $5 bill. The audience didn't know the entire story. Only a handful of people did, but that didn't matter. The bill no longer represented humiliation. It represented transformation, a reminder that mistakes can become lessons. That pride can become humility, that people can change if they're willing to face the truth. As the event ended, Victoria stood beside me. "Do you ever regret not walking away from the deal?" she asked. I thought about it honestly. Then I smiled. No, because in the end, the greatest reward wasn't the money. It wasn't the land. It wasn't watching someone powerful lose control. The greatest reward was seeing a person become better and seeing a community become stronger because of it. That, to me, was worth far more than $40 million. If there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this. Never judge someone's value by their appearance. You don't know their journey. You don't know their struggles. And you certainly don't know their worth. The people we overlook often have the most to teach us, and sometimes the smallest acts of disrespect can become the most expensive mistakes of our lives. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on someone you may have underestimated, someone whose kindness, wisdom, or quiet strength deserved more recognition than they received. And if you've ever witnessed a moment when humility changed a life, consider sharing that story with someone else, because lessons like these become more valuable when they're passed on. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it and subscribe for more emotional, true-to-life narratives. Thank you for listening.